October 25th, 1944. The water in Surigao Strait is black glass under a sky with no moon, and two columns of ships are feeling their way through a funnel that narrows toward Leyte Gulf. On one side, old American battleships, scarred veterans raised from Pearl Harbor mud and rebuilt with new radar brains, wade across the throat of the strait. On the other, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's Southern Force comes on in a night column. The battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, the cruiser Mogami, destroyers like Shigure, Asagumo, Yamagumo, Michishio, pushing north between Mindanao and Leyte toward the anchorage that feeds an entire invasion. If you're new here and you want more of these lived-in, decision-by-decision war stories, subscribe to Warpath. This is the night an old fleet proved what new sensors and a layered trap could do. The stakes are simple and heavy. Break this strait, and you break into Leyte Gulf, where slow, soft targets, transports, oilers, hospital ships, sit behind the fighting line. Hit them, and the troops ashore go hungry for ammunition and fuel. Hit them hard, and the campaign can turn. That knowledge rides with every officer on the bridges under red lights, with every watchstander peering through optics that show more reflection than ship. The geometry itself picks sides. Surigao is a forced corridor, a bottleneck that squeezes a night attack into predictable lanes. That is exactly what Vice Admiral Jesse Oldendorf wants. Layer after layer, each designed to force a reaction, steal time, mark a track, and then hammer a column that can't spread out. Far forward in the dark, the nerves belong to men in plywood mosquito craft. PT boats, spread as pickets, are the first teeth of the defense. Their job is not to kill a battleship with a miracle shot. It's to sting, to force a turn at a bad moment, to make the enemy show his speed, and heading on American radar scopes miles away. Shortly after midnight, the reports begin to stack into a pattern. Multiple contacts, southbound, column formation. A PT skipper barks into a throat mic, voice tight but clipped. The response from the northern net is calm. Keep contact, mark bearings, don't burn yourself for nothing. The PTs jab and vanish. Around 0200, in darkness that feels closer than the air, the first messy exchanges flare and die along the edges of Nishimura's track. PT wakes cross the column. Torpedoes go. Tracers rake emptiness. A searchlight snaps on and off like a blink and then refuses to show again. From the Japanese bridges, the scene is a smear. Brief white boils of water. A feeling of being watched. Course corrections ripple through the line. Maintain formation! A voice on Yamashiro insists, more to the crew than the sea. The column presses on, but it's no longer a machine marching in step. It's a file of ships adjusting, compensating, showing rudder to an enemy they can't quite see. Back north, Oldendorf's map is all vectors and timing. His trap is a staircase. PTs to irritate and reveal, destroyers to maul with torpedoes, cruisers and battleships drawn across the top of the strait like a barred door. He knows the old holes still have old limitations. Armor and speed don't become new just because the paint is. But the brains have changed. West Virginia's radar can reach out and resolve targets with astonishing clarity for a ship built before most of the men aboard were born. Other battleships in the line aren't so lucky. The difference will matter. For now, he watches the clock and waits for the destroyer captains to write the next line of the night. On the PTs, time dilates and jerks. You wait forever for a bearing to steady, then everything happens at once. Torpedoes away, a boat reports into the net. A thin thread of sound whipped by wind and spray. Enemy answering. Water columns leap where no ship should be. A PT turns so hard the stern skids. In the Japanese column, a destroyer lurches under a near miss, another hesitates and must be shouted back into station. The very idea of Surigao, its narrowness, its absence of lateral options, becomes a weapon. Evasion means sliding deeper into the funnel and toward things you can only hear about. American destroyers, somewhere on either side, something bigger and patient beyond. These early hours are deceptive. They feel indecisive because wreckage doesn't instantly litter the sea, but the PT phase is doing its work. Every forced turn, every burst of speed, every correction is a little theft of order. Ashore, the men unloading cargo have no idea that their fate is tilting minute by minute on rudder orders they'll never read. Out here, a dark shape is a geography lesson you can hit. Another set of torpedoes runs long and silent. "We've got them changing course," a PT skipper says, exhausted and proud in equal measure, as he ducks behind black water that hides him and frees him and could kill him if he guesses wrong by 10 seconds. Behind the pickets, cruisers stand ready. Far at the top of the strait, the battle line is spread at right angles to the channel. West Virginia's plotting team faces ghostly in the light, checks and rechecks ranges that tighten in deliberate steps. Somewhere on Pennsylvania, men stare into scopes and see mostly noise. On Mississippi, the fire control team drills their routine again, knowing their moment may come late or not at all. These are old ships rebuilt from grief, and their confidence comes not from armor, but from solutions that hold steady long enough to press a firing key. The men on their bridges don't yet know who will get the clean picture and who will be blind at the crucial minute. The PT boats are running home or running wide when the baton passes. Destroyers begin to slide into the water like knives, throttles low, wakes small, every man who matters counting down to a spread of torpedoes that has to cross a moving lane at just the right second. The Japanese column is deeper into the bottleneck now, formation strained by the harassing phase and the turns it demanded. "Enemy column still northbound," a destroyer voice reports, harder and flatter than before. "The kill zone is ahead, and so is the part of the night where sensors become fate." The destroyers slide out of shadow with their wakes trimmed to nothing, bridges dimmed to a low red, helmsmen whispering corrections in half degrees. To starboard of the Japanese column, 3 American hulls, Ramey, McGowan, Melvin, work in parallel like pickpockets easing into a crowd. To port, another set, Coney and Killen, ghosts along the Leyte shore, feeling for angles. Farther up the funnel, Albert W. Grant threads a riskier lane, closer to the center, because someone has to mark the enemy's face for the cruisers and battleships above. The clock says a little after 300. The night says there's time. The math says there isn't. On Yamashiro's bridge, the sea is a tunnel. The column is still intact, but each turn from the PT phase has left a slight echo, tiny separations in spacing that don't quite heal. A staff officer leans in. "Maintain speed." The order goes, and the screws bite it. Somewhere back in line, Mogami keeps her distance, watchstanders on her wings scanning black on black for wakes, smoke, anything that isn't sea. The destroyer captains feel it more than see it. Space closing, decisions compacting. "Stand by to fire," Remy's torpedo officer says, soft as a prayer. The bearings creep into the window as if the strait itself is helping. Range shortens. "Fish in the water," comes the murmur when the doors bang and the ship shivers, and then she heels into a turn that's been practiced so often it looks like instinct. McGowan and Melvin do the same, salvos staggered, patterns set to stitch across a lane the Japanese must cross if they're going north at this speed. Torpedoes move out, long, invisible promises that may or may not be kept. On the eastern side, Coney and Killen punch their spreads at a slightly different angle, less perfect than the textbook, because the night isn't a textbook. Their wakes flare, then shrink, captains choosing survival over spectacle. Mogami's lookouts catch the rumble and white scars of more wakes than any one ship can tally. Orders climb ladders and vanish into noise. "Evasive action!" comes clipped, and the column throws shoulders, curses, and water. Hits in night water are never neat. Sometimes the first thing you feel is the absence of sound, the stutter where propellers were, and then the blow comes late, or not at all. A Japanese destroyer lurches, Yamagumo, then coughs steam and light and begins to fall out of line. Michishio, further back, takes punishment she can't shake and starts to list. Bleeding speed she will not get back. Asagumo, clipped and hurt, can still move but not fight the way she is trained. It's not just damage, it's dislocation. A column is a rhythm, and the rhythm is breaking. What happened to Fuso begins here, or just after. Historians argue over which torpedoes sealed her fate and how the sequence played out in the dark. Many accounts place a mortal wound in this window, with the old battleship staggering into a slow agony that later becomes catastrophic. Others caution that she lived longer into the chaos. In the moment, the only truth that matters to the men in the water is that something big to the south is hurt, and the sea is not stable under it. Albert W. Grant, by plan and by nerve, has pushed far enough forward to taste both danger and certainty. Her radar paints the mess in pips and arcs. Her lookouts give it smell and temperature. She spits torpedoes, then shifts to guns, then feels the whip of return fire that may not all be Japanese. We are taking hits from large caliber. The bridge snaps into the circuit, not panicked but shocked at the heaviness of the incoming. This is the ruthless geometry of a layered trap. When you fight inside your own kill zone, you risk your own teeth. Up channel, commanders grit through seconds that are exactly as long as a shell's flight time. Coney and Killen close to slash at the wounded. Killen shudders under a counterpunch and keeps her feet. Coney picks targets that flare and fade. One Japanese destroyer, then a patch of water that might be wake or wreck. Every time a searchlight blooms on the horizon, it dies quickly, as if the night itself hates the idea. Discipline holds. Show light only to end fights quickly, then kill the light and move. The West attack group arcs away, engines opening up as their torpedoes finish their long math in the dark. A distant thud comes late, then a heavier one. Not the crack of a shell, but the hollow, body-blow sound of a hit below the waterline. In the Japanese line, Yamashiro adjusts again, carrying on, because that is what battleships do when the book is thin and pride is thick. "Maintain course," someone says for the third time in 15 minutes, and the ship obeys with a steadiness that looks like courage from the outside and feels like stubbornness on the bridge. Between the salvos and the torpedoes and the turns, Mogami is having a worse night than she can admit. Concussions rattle her frame, splinters and shock degrade her fighting trim. Her place in line becomes an argument instead of a fact. Shigure, the survivor by temperament and reputation, endures and stays alive by the old rule: move when the enemy expects you to freeze. Freeze when he expects you to move. The result of the destroyer phase is not a tidy tally, but a deformation, exactly what Oldendorf needed. The enemy column, strained and bleeding, is still trying to go north in a place that only accepts north as an idea, not a practical reality. The angles available to the Americans are better now. The ones available to the Japanese are worse. The bottleneck has worked the way terrain always works in war. It has taken small choices and turned them into large outcomes. "Enemy force continuing," comes a cool voice from a U.S. destroyer as she throttles back into the shadows to reload courage and check wounds. The path ahead narrows to a single hard truth. The surviving Japanese corps, Yamashiro in the lead, Mogami damaged, Shigure trailing the hurt, is steaming into the mouth of a battle line, drawn like a crossbar across the strait. Up there, some American ships can see the night with instruments that don't blink, and some can't. The next minutes will belong to radar, to timing, and to the last perfect diagram in battleship history. They come out of the narrows like a file of ghosts and find a wall waiting for them. Across the top of the strait, the American battle line lies abeam to the channel, guns trained south, barrels stepped like organ pipes. This is the last clean diagram left to battleships. If you can put your broadside across his nose, you can bring everything to bear, while he can only answer with what will bear forward. It is geometry with consequences, and tonight, the instruments will decide who draws the line first. On West Virginia, the radar plot has been building confidence for minutes that feel like hours. Target pips walk up the scope in steady, measured increments. Ranges come tight, then lock. The plotting officer calls out a solution that doesn't wobble. "We have him," the gunnery officer says, and heads nod in a rhythm that fights down adrenaline. There is no need to see a ship when you can see the math of it. "Commence firing," the captain orders, and the first salvo goes with the deep whump of 8 big guns, a weight you feel in your ribs more than your ears. The shells are on their way for long seconds that live like small lives. Farther down the line, Tennessee and California are close behind, their own solutions converging. On Maryland, the picture is dirtier, the old set giving a smear where you wish for a spear. Pennsylvania can't clean the noise, targets half seen and half believed, and holds her fire, discipline winning a quiet argument with pride. Mississippi breathes through the procedures again, patient, knowing that late and right is better than early and wrong. The asymmetry is real and human. Men on ships a few hundred yards apart inhabit different nights. West Virginia's shells arrive first and walk a bracket around the lead contact. Yamashiro's world suddenly framed by fountains of water that rise and fall like hard rain, then by impacts that mean the range ladder is centered. Straddling, a voice on her plotting team reports with forced calm, and the second salvo is already gone before the word finishes. The sea around the Japanese flagship turns into proof. On Yamashiro's bridge, the crash has no meaning beyond now. The forward guns answer because that is what they can do. The ship presents a thin face to a wide enemy and bleeds seconds she can't steal back. Cruisers higher on the line add their punishment, their faster-firing guns knitting a beat that fills the spaces between the heavy salvos. Tennessee and California settle in, their first round stepping close, their next one stepping on. On, Tennessee's spotter says, as if calling a landing, and the battery grimly repeats. Some ships see with instruments and some with flashes, and in the end both are enough because the target has nowhere to go, but north into pain or south into admission. Check searchlight, an American voice suggests, then lets the idea die. There's no need to paint what radar already draws, and there's danger in making yourself the brightest thing in the night. The Japanese line tries to answer with force and movement. Yamashiro kicks her rudder, then steadies, trying to keep the column from folding. Mogami, thrown and damaged by earlier violence, struggles to hold place. A destroyer astern flares and is gone. Another staggers, but clings to life with the ferocity of habit. Maintain course, someone orders again, but the strait is a judge without mercy. The American fire control teams are doing the same thing over and over, and each repetition is more certain than the last. On West Virginia, the splashes of the last salvo are already being turned into the next corrections. Down 200 comes the tight instruction, and the turrets comply. A ripple of flashes runs her deck again. Tennessee's third salvo arrives inside that beat. California's a moment behind. Maryland joins on partial solutions when a silhouette resolves enough to trust. Pennsylvania, still fighting ghosts in the scope, refuses to guess. Mississippi, at last, takes her cleanest shot. A single, late salvo, more coda than chorus. None of the men on those bridges know yet that historians will argue about these details for decades. They only know that something large ahead is coming apart under a weight no ship can carry long. The night accepts the American line's pattern and magnifies it. Each salvo is a metronome tick that steals capability from the Japanese formation. Yamashiro's forward battery slams and recoils and slams again. Her return splashes march up the American line, hunting luck. Splashes short, a calm voice notes on one battle wagon's bridge. Not triumphant, just precise. The answer is the same. Keep the ladder, keep the time, keep the pressure. If a searchlight shows, a white pillar groping for certainty, it is cut quickly by the knowledge that certainty is already owned by radar. Shige-ordered beliefs clash with new realities. The night-fighting mystique that carried so many Japanese captains through earlier battles meets an enemy that sees in the dark without asking permission. Courage is still courage, but it is measured now in how long you can hold a course under invisible aim. Yamashiro holds longer than most ships would, because that is the point of being a flagship and a battleship, and a culture's ideal all at once. But even ideals break on enough steel. Target bearing changing, she's losing way, a U.S. spotter calls as the pattern of pips and splashes shifts. The next American salvo lands not around but into. The next one after that feels like a verdict. Somewhere beyond, the cruisers pick up other contacts and harvest what the destroyers and torpedoes began. The line doesn't shout. It breathes and repeats and does its work. By around 0400, the Japanese column isn't a column anymore. It is a scatter of wounds and wills. Yamashiro's fate is sealed, as clear to the men firing at her as it is denied by the men aboard her. Mogami is a ship with a problem that daylight will make worse. Shigure is alive because Shigure is built to survive. Southward, the water carries rumors of a second group, Kiyohide Shima, coming late to a party that has already turned into an argument about exits. The American guns ease momentarily for corrections and smoke. The echoes of the last perfect diagram run across the strait, and the night briefly holds its breath for the next confusion to arrive. Shima arrives to wreckage and rumor, a second hand walking into a fight already decided, but not yet quiet. Shortly after 0400, his cruisers, Nachi and Ashigara, nose into smoke and glare that make the sea look like it's carrying its own bad weather. The reports are contradictory. Some say 2 battleships are on fire ahead. Others say 1. Others say hulks. Searchlights flare and die. What the scopes draw is less a formation than a smear. Shima orders a cautious approach, then a probe. Then, when the horizon answers with hard splashes and the water ahead looks mined with torpedoes, he gives the one order that rescues what he can: turn back. The turn is not neat. In this crowded darkness, where distance lies and timing cheats, Nachi and Mogami find each other the worst way. Steel on steel, a sudden, brutal meeting that mangles Mogami farther. For a moment, the sea is all whistles and shouted bearings, the old ritual that follows any collision. And then the ships shake free with wounds they cannot argue away. "Break contact," a clipped voice insists on Nachi. The force bows out of the strait, the way a man leaves a room where his point is already lost, dignity intact, because it is all that can be kept. Down in the killing ground, the last survivors of Nishimura's column are not really a column at all. Yamashiro's absence is a pressure drop you feel, rather than see. The flagship's silence speaks more clearly than any report. Mogami staggers and smokes and tries to be harder to kill than she looks. Shigure is still there because Shigure is built around the art of staying there, her captain finding lanes between predictability and panic. A few wrecked shapes mark where other destroyers tried to take fate head-on and were stripped of motion for the effort. Above them, the American line breathes out after the long hold. "Ceasefire, check bearing," a voice calls on one battleship, careful not to let relief slip into sloppiness. Searchlights flick briefly to confirm that certain shapes are wounds and not threats, then die as discipline reasserts itself. The order of the night is to trust the instruments. Where a ship is clearly finished, the finishing is done cleanly. Where a ship is dead in truth, but noisy in appearance, patience wins. The danger of shooting at your own is a shadow in every captain's head, and the example of Albert W. Grant's bruises is fresh enough to keep hands tight on restraint. Oldendorf's architecture has done what it was built to do. The PTs marked the track and stole order. The destroyers hammered it out of shape. The battle line broke what kept moving. Now the job is to keep the exits honest. American cruisers rake the channel edges, pushing any survivor south and east, away from the transports and the anchorage that sparked this whole night. A few curt bridge exchanges puncture the quiet. "Target fading. Hold illumination. Negative. Radar holds." It is the sound of men denying the night a single extra accidental tragedy. The strait returns to a kind of ruined stillness as the hour bends toward dawn. Smoke lays down in low sheets. The phosphorescence in shattered wakes glows and then gives up. In the east, a slow strip of gray begins to pull detail out of absence. What looked like a rumor at 0300 stands revealed as a wreck. What felt like a threat resolves into driftwood and oil. With light comes that honest inventory the dark denies. A man on one American bridge murmurs, "It's over," and is answered by the ship's own hum. A reminder that, no, the clock is still moving, and so is the war. Daylight brings a different kind of order, the kind that flies. American aircraft rise to make the night's verdict permanent. Their job isn't spectacle, it's accounting. Damaged stragglers that slipped the line in the dark now have to cross sunlight. Mogami, already punished by torpedoes, shells, and the collision in the smoke, tries to limp clear. The air finds her, and the day hands in its bill. Other wounded ships thread south along coastlines that do not care about their cause. Short declarative radio calls, contact, attacking. Good hits. Replace the long tension of radar tracks and ladder corrections. The killing has a different sound under the sun, but the logic is the same. Remove from the board anything that can come back to hurt you. Shima's force, spared the core of the trap by lateness and caution, slides away with its story already written in negative space. What wasn't done, what couldn't be done, what would have been wasted to try. The men in those cruisers will carry the insoluble feeling of arriving to an outcome instead of making one. Down in the strait, wreckage and oil sketch out the geometry that decided the night. A bottleneck, a crossbar, a series of choices stacked like stairs that could only be climbed one way. On the American decks, the faces in the after-action light are tired and older than they were at midnight. A few of these ships remember December 7th as pain in their bones, and there is a private justice in being useful now, not as symbols, but as tools that worked exactly as intended. The conversations are quiet. Good shooting. Good restraint. We held the line. It isn't triumph so much as the warm exhaustion of a plan that fit the place and time so tightly there was little room left for luck. By late morning, the strait is mostly memory. Tugging currents take fuel slicks where they want. Small boats skitter and search. The big ships turn outward to watch for whatever the day might still throw at Leyte. Word filters across circuits about other fights, north and east, carriers and courage colliding in their own patterns. But here, the tally is clear enough for honest men to share. The Southern force did not break the door. The transports behind the door will keep feeding a bridgehead that now looks more certain than it did yesterday. History has a way of flattening nights like this into neat diagrams and settled conclusions. The men who stood the watches know better. They know the diagram only existed because a lot of frightened, disciplined people did simple things right in sequence. They know, too, that what happened here is going to outlive battleships as an idea. At Surigao, old holes with new minds beat darkness with information and teamwork. That lesson doesn't rust. Before the logbooks close, someone writes a line that feels too clean to be completely true and too true not to write. Last time in history, a battle line crossed a T and made it count. The next part of the story is what that meant. To Leyte, to the doctrine, and to the people who had to live with the cost. By sunrise, the strait is a ledger. Oil inks the water in long, ugly strokes. Bits of timber and paint drift past like torn pages. The radios that hummed all night are quiet enough for the ship's own noises to come back. The beat of auxiliary pumps, the small metallic clicks that mean a big machine is finally breathing easy. A boatswain on West Virginia rubs a patch of soot off a stanchion and says, mostly to himself, "We did our job." No one argues. The battle line stands in place like a drawn breath, then exhales into routine. Ammo tallies, damage checks, coffee poured into hands that still shake like tuning forks. What the night protected, the morning makes plain. The Southern force didn't break through. The transports in Leyte Gulf, slow, tender, irreplaceable, can keep unloading the stuff that makes a beachhead real. Artillery rounds, gasoline, radios, socks. On shore, soldiers who slept through the detonations at sea wake to a day that still has a future. The strait did what geography sometimes does for a good plan. It channeled an enemy into a place where his strengths didn't fit and his weaknesses mattered. Oldendorf's staircase, PTs to mark and irritate, destroyers to tear formation apart, the battle line to write the verdict, proved stronger than any one part of it looked on paper. Inside that verdict are smaller truths that travel far. One is that instruments bent the night. West Virginia's radar let her fire early and sure, turning math into metal before the human eye could even earn a guess. Tennessee and California followed on cleaner pictures than their pre-war designers could have imagined. Pennsylvania proved that sometimes a good ship is a bad sensor, and discipline beats pride. Mississippi's late single salvo was the professional's bow to reality. Accuracy first, or not at all. See first, shoot first. An American gunnery officer mutters in the log room, copying down ranges. Then he scratches it out, because it sounds like bragging. Another truth is that mystique fades under pressure and time. Japan's reputation for night fighting, earned in earlier campaigns, was real, but it met a trap that wasn't about courage or legend. It was about how to make a lane narrower with every mile, how to trade small torpedo spreads for large structural failures, how to let a radar scope do the seeing for a ship whose eyes had reasons to lie. Even the searchlights, symbols of dominance in older battles, were tools to be used sparingly and then snuffed. Light kills you if you forget why you turned it on, a cruiser captain says later, dry as a chart. For some men in the American line, the meaning is more private. A few had watched water burn at Pearl Harbor, had tasted paint and fear and the metallic shock of waking under a sky that hated you. They rode old holes that had been dragged from mud, opened, strengthened, studded with new gear and new doctrine, then sent back out like repaired bones. They did not come to Surigao for revenge. They came to do a job that would let other ships do theirs. But when the night worked, they felt a kind of steadied pride that didn't need cheering. "This is for the convoy," one petty officer says, and that's as close as the deck gets to poetry. Tactically, Surigao is already sliding toward museum glass. The last time in history that a battle line crossed a T and made it count happened under radar, not under searchlights alone. That matters. It says that even the final exam for dreadnoughts was graded by electronics and process. Strategically, the fight locks a door the enemy needed open. Without the Southern force, the Japanese plan to smash the invasion from below is gone. Whatever threat remains has to come from the north and center, down far different lanes. By the time news of other Leyte fights flickers over circuits, carriers, and deception off Cape Engano, a desperate slug up by Samar, the essential thing here is settled. The supply life of an entire army was not cut. Doctrine flows downhill from nights like this. Layered defense isn't just an idea, it's a lived sequence with timings you can teach, irritate, dislocate, finish. Sensor discipline is not a footnote. It's the difference between a good ship in the right place and a great ship that changes outcomes. Fire control is no longer a mechanical trick. It's the heart of whether courage becomes effect. The U.S. Navy will carry those lessons forward into a world that is already being pulled away from big gun lines by air power, submarines, and the invisible nets of information. If battleships are a language, Surigao is their final, clean sentence. Short, declarative, and closing the paragraph. There are caveats in the margins that honest men keep. Historians will argue about Fuso's last minutes, about which torpedoes started which chain reactions, about what exactly happened in smoke when Shima's cruisers found Mogami by accident. The people who were there will remember sounds and delays, not conclusions. The long hush between commence firing and the far-off white towers of water. The way a shell landing short makes a sound that teaches you something you didn't know you needed. The terror of hearing a friendly heavy gun find your own small silhouette by mistake and then hearing it stop. "We got lucky," an officer says, and his chief shakes his head. "We got ready." By late afternoon, the strait is a workplace again. Sailors sweep brass, count scars, lean on rails, and finally let their breathing find the same pace as the engines. Somewhere in the wardroom, a coffee pot dies bravely. Officers sign the papers that make a battle into paragraphs. The sun slides down the sky, rain drifts in low curtains over the Leyte hills, and the American line thins as ships peel off to where they're needed next. The men who stood the night will sleep when orders allow. The ones who can't sleep will stare at the overhead and see green pips crawling in straight lines toward the top of a scope. Forever. Surigao's meaning, at the level that lasts, is simple to say and hard to do. Old holes with new minds, layered tactics in a place that punished anyone who broke rhythm, professionals who chose information over impulse. That mixture protected a beachhead and a campaign. It protected people who never knew the names of the ships that guarded them. If war has any mercy, it is that. Competence that keeps strangers alive. This video's content was compiled from multiple sources. If anything is inaccurate or needs correction, please comment below. Thank you, and see you next time.